When we talk about Scope 3, we often focus on the complexity. We talk about spreadsheets, the frameworks, the endless supplier data requests, etc. But what if we could actually turn this complexity into collaboration and make carbon data something that drives product, but also workflow innovation instead of anxiety? And this is exactly what today's story is about. Namely, how Telefónica Germany and ClimateChoice went from a small proof of concept to a scalable process for product carbon footprint data, not only connection, but also empowerment of procurement, suppliers, and product teams alike. And with this, a very warm welcome, everybody, to this choice event number 91 from pilot to product scaling PCF data collection. My name is Josepha Niebelschütz. I'm the growth marketing lead at ClimateChoice, and I'm really thrilled to have all of you with us today. Now, if this is your first choice event, well, then welcome to this happily growing community of sustainability and procurement professionals and everybody else working to make Scope 3 business as usual. And if you're wondering what this webinar series is all about, well, every 2 weeks we actually really try to bring together those companies who don't just talk about Scope 3 transformation, but actually build it. And today's session is particularly exciting because it's about moving from scattered data request to really scalable data collaboration. And we will learn how to do so by the case of O2 Telefónica Germany. Now, as you will see also in the presentation, O2 Telefónica Germany's Scope 3 actually makes up 98% of total emissions. So the question here really isn't whether to act, but how to make action feasible across hundreds of suppliers. And to answer this question, O2 Telefónica Germany collaborated with us at ClimateChoice to test and then actually scale a process for collecting supplier-specific product-level data that is not only comparable and verifiable, but also usable to have better conversations on the supplier side, but also smarter discussions internally to drive low-carbon procurement and product design decisions at scale. And use cases like these are the ones that we will be exploring today and that are beautifully showing also our mission at ClimateChoice, because what we do is that we help companies move from estimations to evidence as we replace averages with primary supplier data in order to help companies shift to see Scope 3 not as a reporting challenge, but really as a source of business value. And as you will also see today, in this collaboration with Telefónica Germany, our role was to help gather, standardize, and structure data, but also to act as neutral third party. So really taking away the pressure out of the client-supplier relationship and allowing both sides to improve and focus on solutions. And this is also what makes this whole story so relevant, because Telefónica Germany is showing how data can become a beautiful bridge to connect climate action, supplier relationships, and business performance in a single process. And with that, I'm very happy to introduce the two speakers of today, namely Dr. Scott Bryant. He's the Group Lead Environment and Climate at O2 Telefónica Germany, and he's been driving Scope 3 decarbonization and circular economy initiatives across the organization, but actually also externally and even at the government level. So maybe we will hear a little bit more about that. And then also there's Yasha Tarani, the co-founder and CEO of our ClimateChoice company. And he's, very much the one leading then also our work to make supplier and product data collection scalable and business relevant. And with that, Scott and Yasha, very welcome to this virtual stage. It's beautiful to have you. And how's it going from where you're tuning in today?
Thanks for having me, also, Yasha. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Josepha mentioned, good to give a bit of context. Who on earth is talking to you all today in this virtual void? Scott Bryant, as Josepha said, currently the group lead for environment and climate and for the environment and climate team at O2 Telefónica here in Germany. And there's a bit of context from my background broadly in the sustainability space for the last 10 to 15 years, engineering, so renewable energy engineering, resource efficiency, and in the last 5-10 years then into the bigger Scope 3 and circular economy space. So very exciting and very daunting at the same time. So thanks for having me.
Nice, thank you. And Yasha, where are you tuning in from today?
Yeah.
How's it going?
Hi, hi everyone. I'm in beautiful Berlin. The sun is shining. We have blue skies, so really nice. Actually, it feels a little bit warmer than a typical November day, I guess. And yeah, really happy to be here as well. And yeah, talk about what we did with Scott together in the past, I guess, like almost 2 years now, since we started working on product data together. And yeah, excited what to come. And a little bit of background on my end. Yeah, I'm the co-founder and CEO at ClimateChoice. Mainly work with our clients on the climate and procurement side to translate and to see, okay, how can we actually, yeah, jointly drive decarbonization efforts. And yeah, my background is I've been an entrepreneur since, I guess, 15 years. Started another data company before, and since now almost six. Yeah, now it's like 5.5. Soon 6 years driving Scope 3 action, and yeah, really happy to be here and talk more about yeah, our experiences, and also happy to hear about yeah, others. So
Yeah, nice. And I mean, now that we know at least a little bit about the two of you, I also know that you actually brought some questions to get to know the audience, so that you can then also see who is in here and potentially also adapt a little bit what you're saying to our target audience here in this call today. So Yasha, why don't you share the little survey that you have prepared?
sure. So, maybe, yeah, we would love to hear from you a little bit of kind of like your perspective, right? On what's your perspective on Scope 3 emission? Are you currently working on Scope 3 emissions in your organization? Is it an active part of your work? Is it not yet, but like your company is starting to or planning to start to, or only indirect, right? Maybe like you work with Scope 3 topics, but maybe in a more broader sense with yeah, also other sustainability topics in the value chain, and or no, you're not currently involved. And second question, which we would love to hear from you, is like which area describes best your main role? Are you working in procurement, supplier management, supply chain, procurement excellence? So anything in the procurement area or in sustainability, climate strategy, reporting, ESG, or in finance, controlling risk, or even in product research and development, or other operational areas. And last but not least, I see like there's a lot of people already answered. Are you already working on product carbon footprint data collection and quality checks? And for example, are you actively collecting PCF data from suppliers, or you're starting to exploring the topic, or not yet, but you're planning to beginning to within the next 12 months, or it's at the moment not applicable to your role? I feel almost everyone has answered, so I give you a couple more seconds to answer and join the poll. And yeah, it's all really, really helpful, and I'll share the results happily in a second. So 3, 2, 1. Okay. Yeah, there's another another vote. So I'll stop and I'll share the results. Josepha, do you want to lead us through the results?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I think it's really cool to see that so many people are already working here on Scope 3 in their organizations. So 2/3 are already actively working on it. And then also a lot are at least indirectly confronted with the topic. So I guess a lot of experts and practitioners here on the call. And then also a lot of people here from sustainability and procurement. So that's a good share between those two departments. But also we have some finance and controlling people here. So also welcome everybody. Looking forward to getting yeah, different questions from different angles in based on this. And then also we can see that close to 50% are actually already collecting PCF data from suppliers. So let's find out then also later, you know, where you are. Maybe you're still in the pilot phase, you do it for a smaller supplier base, or whether you have already scaled it as, for example, Telefónica. And yeah, with that, I guess I can hand it over to the two of you. I think you've got a very hands-on crowd here with us. And that being said, hands-on, please also everybody use the chat function so you can put in your questions at any point in time. So if you go down to the bar here in Zoom, you have this like small icon with the question mark on it. So put in your questions at any point in time. I will try to either ask them during the conversation or then also at the end. And as always, for the questions that we don't get to answer, I will ask Yasha and Scott to answer them via email to you afterwards, so they will not get lost for sure. And just a little thing, I got a little bit disturbed in the beginning because there was a lot of noise in my flat. I hope that noise cancellation actually took it out. But in case that is so, Yasha and Scott, please let me know and I go on mute at any point in time. And with that, handing it over to you guys.
Thanks, Josepha.
I'll just quickly change the presentation. Give me a second, and then hold on. Right. Here we go. Jumping between a couple different presentations. So that should be it, and I'll just start Vollbit modus. So yeah, really happy. Thanks a lot, Josepha, for the great introduction. So what we're gonna share today, and I'm really excited about, is how we went from piloting on how could it look like, what are the current challenges, right, on PCF data and product related emission data collection, and how we're thinking about scalability on that topic. And with that, we want to start actually, or I would hand it over to Scott first to tell us a little bit about the context. What is Telefónica doing, and why did we even start and think about this project? So Scott, I would hand it over to you. I'll mute myself, and please let me know when I skip this, jump to the next slide, so you can lead through.
Thanks, Yasha. Yeah, so I guess as Yasha said, projects like this don't happen in a void. So wanting to give a bit of context for where on earth this project's come from, and I guess potentially a bit of relatability to some of you on the call, and or showing where there might be differences from companies or organizations you're working for. So it's a bit of a background for some of you who might not be familiar with Telefónica Germany, or O2 as the broader brand. It's effectively a subsidiary of the Spanish organization Telefónica, a global telecommunication company, the equivalent of Deutsche Telekom in Spain. And in Germany, it's operating with about 45 million customers, operating 4G and 5G network, and effectively doing a lot of heavy lifting emissions-wise in terms of delivering of mobile devices, operating a telecommunications network and building that out, trying to deal with joys of black holes in network that some of you might experience if you're around Germany, and in general having a lot of contribution, or grappling with a lot of challenge in the scope 3 side of emissions due to the large amount of spend every year on goods and services in terms of operating such a large telecommunications network and serving a lot of customers. Yasha? And with that, and with such a large footprint, there's obviously in the last 2 decades or so a lot of focus on what is the potential environmental impact of these operations, and how one can develop a greener telecommunications network. And so quite a lot of work has been done historically and in recent times in terms of working towards how do we bring down emissions towards net zero in 2040 as per our science-based targets initiative commitments, but focusing on typical and traditional scope 1 and 2 operational and electricity emissions, which we've had quite a lot of success managing and bringing down through various initiatives and targeted strategies. But then the elephant in the room that Josepha alluded to at the start of this presentation is our value chain, upstream and downstream value chain emissions, scope 3 emissions, representing about 98% of the remaining emissions that we have left. And given that we have a 39% reduction targets for the end of this year, which we're not completely on track to meet, unfortunately, and 56% by 2030, let alone 90+% in 2040. It remains quite a big challenge that we're looking to tackle. And so working with ClimateChoice is one avenue of exploring how can we add another arrow to our quiver of potential solutions to try and chip away at that rather large set of emissions that we have to tackle outside of our own operations. Yasha? And so from a Telefonica perspective here in Germany and more globally across the different country operations, so I'm seeing German operations working with our global colleagues in Spain and in other country operations, looking at how have we gone to split up scope 3 emissions, and how does this product carbon footprint pilot project fit into the broader suite of initiatives, given that there are a lot of different levers one can try and pull, or knobs to turn to try and turn the dial on scope 3 emissions. And for us, we've sort of split it into the initiatives that make most sense to work at an industry level. So it's clearly a lot of shared suppliers, a lot of shared challenges in telecommunications industry, but probably also for many of you on the call. So a lot of how do we share the pain and share the workload, given that there are a lot of similar or same suppliers. There are a lot of questions that we all have. So how do we work together to leverage out the shared challenge and shared burden there to start bringing scope 3 emissions down across the board rather than going it alone. Then been looking at, as a multinational company, what are initiatives that we can do at a global level that then feeds down to country level initiatives and local environment and climate teams like mine. How do we build on that so it's not being replicated or sort of doubling the amount of work that needs done at different country levels. And then finally, what are the on the ground initiatives that are more readily controlled at a country level, either because of country specific requirements or because it's a little bit easier to steer individual initiatives and projects on the ground at a country level. And so that's how we've split our scope 3 initiatives, and just wanting to give a little bit of background to all of those, just to put this product carbon footprint pilot project in a bit of context. Yasha?
And Scott, just one, so you will be talking about Jack right now, because there was also a question on, the comparability of this in comparison to other, like cross-industry or intra-industry collectives.
Yeah, so it's almost as if this question was timed perfectly. I had no hand in it, I promise. But yeah, so at an industry level, a perfect example of this is the Joint Alliance for CSR, representing a very large chunk now of the global telecommunications companies, looking at how do we collectively work with our supply chain and supplier companies to bring down our scope 3, our collective scope 3 emissions, given that a large majority of telecommunications companies have been setting 2040 net zero targets with the SBTi, and therefore how do we effectively all pull in the same direction at the same time to sort of leverage our joint resources, if you will, and at the same time not be asking the same question 40 times of suppliers that we all have in common. And so that's quite a big initiative, and is probably reflected, I know, in other industries. I know in the chemical industry, there's also similar initiatives in the automotive industry, and I think it really reflects the shared challenge, and that although it's a competitive space as a private industry, there are still collective challenges and opportunities that do make sense to try and deal with as a group rather than as individual players. Yasha? Yeah, so from a company perspective, this does tie into the industry level approach that we've taken, and we've taken with colleagues from other organizations in their sector, but effectively looking at how do we split up the work and the amount of resources that especially our colleagues at global level in the global sustainability department are able to apply to different sets of suppliers, given that there are typically a smaller number of suppliers that have the largest or an outweighted impact on our Scope 3 emissions, given their size and given the amount of services and products that we're procuring from them every year. And so looking at focusing more heavily on those through to taking a lighter touch with the broader suite of the bottom sort of 10,000 suppliers that represent the whole supply chain, but might not, are only representing across thousands of companies, only 5 to 10% of the overall Scope 3 impact. So effectively trying to pick our battles given the limited resources versus the size of the Scope 3 challenge. Yasha? And this is from engagement, such as what ClimateChoice and others are doing in terms of how do you engage with that vast sea of suppliers in terms of where are they at, what are the pathways forward for them, how mature and ready are they in terms of delivering Scope 3 data that we can then make decisions on, and be working with them in terms of what are the next steps to start bringing that down for us as a customer, but also for them as an organization in general, through to sort of the smaller selection of suppliers. So that next step that are a bit more mature and more relevant for us as an organization in terms of more direct engagement with these individual companies, sort of 200 plus companies, and looking at how do we meet them where they are, depending on their level of maturity in terms of engaging in this topic of Scope 3 emissions, not just reporting, but also actually setting targets and looking to decarbonize not only their own operations, but their supply chains, and also looking at tweaking their designs and processes to start dealing with that, and looking at how do we encourage that, how do we incentivize that ourselves. And this often then links into industry level initiatives such as that JAC initiative, in terms of how do we collectively then incentivize and reward such organizations to progressively get better, be that as a really progressive and mature organization in the Scope 3 scheme of things, through to those that are just starting out but needing to develop their own pathways. And finally, for sort of those select 20 or 30 major suppliers that are representing over half of our emissions, how do we, especially given that they are a key supplier for many large organizations such as ours in the industry, how do we sit down with them directly and look at what are our expectations? It's going to be a long-term relationship, large quantity of spend with these organizations. They also are getting pressure to decarbonize. So how do we collectively then start setting more rigorous 2040 targets in terms of decarbonization? And so going with the science-based targets initiative to really vet and verify how do we get from where we are now to that 2040 target as a company, but also as an industry. Yasha? And finally, sort of trying to distill that all down, we then have our work at a country level. So in Germany specifically, in terms of how do we take those global level initiatives, those global level supplier engagement processes, and look at how does that impact day-to-day activities as a company of 8,000 staff, building out a network and engaging with 45 million customers, but also how do we use our closeness to on-the-ground operations and customers to actually test out initiatives that can potentially filter back up into the broader company, in terms of using that flexibility of being a bit more nimble in terms of being able to try things and see what works. And this is where our product carbon footprint pilot project with Yasha and ClimateChoice came in after an existing relationship with ClimateChoice over the last couple of years. Yasha?
And Scott, there's another question actually before you now dive into this, because there was somebody asking, like, it looks like a very, like an in-depth process, how you set up your Scope 3 journey at O2 Telefónica. And there was the question of what was the tipping point that made you then decide, okay, now is the time that we need product level data. So when did you feel mature enough, so to say, as an organization in terms of systems, data infrastructure, setup, whatnot, to go for this project?
I would say, so I can't take full credit. So I've been O2 Telefónica since June 2024. So I would say it's probably in the couple of years prior to that and really picking up speed now, is that in the early 2020s, it was becoming very apparent that the well was running dry, or the bottom of the barrel was being scraped for Scope 1 and 2 emissions. There's only so much further one can push fleet transition and emissions reduction to electrification, jumping on renewable energy for 100% of renewables, really pushing energy efficiency because we're a big energy user running a network. And so really then realizing, well, it's becoming, I guess if one is blunt, becoming a bit farcical, focusing just on Scope 1 and 2, given that it's been reduced by 96, 97%. And the elephant in the room of, all right, what on earth, what we're buying, how we're designing, what infrastructure we're rolling out. We really need to actually start looking at this in depth and not just reporting on it, because it's obviously complex enough beast reporting on this. And we could argue the rest of the afternoon how best one analyzes and reports on primary data, secondary data, the mix, how challenging that is, but really then going into, well, what are we going to do about it? And that was sort of that tipping point of, right, well, we've come this far, we've got all of these runs on the board, so to speak. What's next, given that we can't just rest on our laurels and say, right, we're good, we're buying renewable energy and are really quite efficient in terms of our infrastructure energy use. So that sort of led initially to the initial collaboration with the ClimateChoice in terms of looking at the supplier engagement piece on a Germany level, sort of as a bit more granular to the broader global level supplier engagement piece, which is originally where our joint journey with ClimateChoice started. And effectively from there, this relationship then led to, well, we have this data and some granularity on our suppliers, but if we're then actually engaging with them as part of our procurement process, how do we best steer this, given that obviously we use LCAs and product carbon footprints, but how do we build this into our own ongoing procurement process as standard? Because there are only a limited number of sustainability experts internally. There's a large amount of work that's ongoing. It only makes sense if you can build understanding product carbon footprint and evaluating that as part of a buying process in a streamlined way that fits into existing business operations, or can be put into that process in a relatively streamlined way. Yasha? And that's why we jumped at the chance, once discussing with Yasha and the team, what could we do in terms of looking at product carbon footprints. We've been getting them from suppliers in the past, but not been using them in a streamlined way. And what could this look like if we're testing out? How would this work in order to get this into a standardized process in the future? Just as a bit of context for us, as part of our procurement process, we do have a internal shadow carbon price, so to speak, for procurement process. But because a lot of our purchases are for energy intensive network equipment, at the moment it's currently focused on effectively scope 3.11, so energy use. And so it's very much looking at the life cycle energy use as an additional cost, both an energy cost, so in euros, but also then a euro cost from a carbon price, given that the German electricity grid is still not decarbonized. So in discussing with Yasha, sort of in 2023, it was the question of, could we then, given that this process exists, how would we then bring in the broader product carbon footprint into this thinking, and what would we need to do in terms of testing out how we engage with our suppliers? How do we vet that data? How do we integrate it before actually making a proposal, not wanting to go and say, it'd be great to implement this, but we don't actually know how to do it. So hence the product carbon footprint pilot with ClimateChoice. Yasha? And yeah, I guess this all came about, as many of you are undoubtedly aware on the call, given that 50% of the call grappling with the challenges of product carbon footprints, LCAs, etc., in terms of vast array of different types of data from our suppliers in the past, and not really being able to compare apples with apples. How does one actually integrate that into a streamlined flow process, especially given that there's procurement colleagues that are needing to make these decisions at the end of the day? So how do we get to a point where it's spitting out a number that's able to be incorporated into a decision-making process and doesn't need heavy vetting from a sustainability team. And yeah, how do you compare an Excel spreadsheet that someone's sending through to a JPEG that's perhaps with Mandarin characters that are needing to be translated through to a more detailed and rigorous EPD that's been shared with us. So part of that, all of that came into the mix in terms of, all right, how do we bring all of these challenges together to utilize ClimateChoice's expertise to actually start looking at how does one automate and vet these PCF data and the process of getting it. Yasha?
And Scott, before we go on actually into the next piece, there's two questions related to what you have just said, and really, yeah, talking about the operationalizing piece of carbon data. There is one question from Andre in the chat, and he was asking how you actually assign weight on sustainability qualities in your request for proposals in the process, because I mean, if we now look at how this is currently being done, right? If there's only binary requirements, well, then the choice would always be on price. But now sustainable products are often still more costly to make, hopefully not in the future. But how do you weight in this piece, and how does this pilot actually help you with it?
So I guess I have my own reservations in this, and I guess in past organizations, I've found that for certain things, more circularity rather than scope 3. So that's potentially getting off topic. There are probably some areas where criteria need to be, this is the minimum acceptable standard. So you're effectively making everyone playing on the same playing field rather than playing just to price. For scope 3 emissions, where we are, and historically with this life cycle energy cost, it's been turning it into a euro figure that then gets added to the overall cost of the project. So you're comparing apples with apples. So for up until now, so prior to the proof of concept, this was, okay, this infrastructure is being used over a predefined period, 5-year period. What is the cost of electricity based on the energy efficiency of this product, and this operational expense is then added on top of the capex price, which therefore ends up incentivizing for heavy energy use products, efficient products over cheap products, because the cost of energy over time is so much higher than the capex cost. From a carbon perspective, scope 3 carbon, this gets a little trickier, but this is what we're looking at now in terms of, whilst I will take good over perfect, with the whole perfect being the enemy of good, in terms of looking at how do we turn a product carbon footprint as a life cycle carbon from manufacturing through to the use phase through to disposal, turning that into a overall euro cost for the pricing decision making, using an internal carbon price that ideally is tracking or increasing over time and tracking carbon markets. So that's where we're hoping to head. And on a circularity note, potentially setting minimum standards for repairability or recycled content and similar. But yeah, it's really depends on the industry and what suppliers you have available. Because obviously, if you only have 3 or 4 suppliers, it doesn't matter how hard you set certain requirements. If the solution doesn't exist, you can push those suppliers, but yeah, it really depends.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, I mean, talking about pushing supplies, this is also what we will see, how ClimateChoice also stepped into, have this secure room for exchange, right, in order to improve and to nudge each other, not so much under pressure, but more motivate each other. But more on this, I guess, then also later. So thanks for this answer. And looking at the time, I will keep the other question for later. So maybe we can now move on. But a lot of interesting questions coming up here.
Yeah, no, and it's great to hear, because we don't have all the answers. I wish we did, but yeah, it's a bit of a journey for us as well. And yeah, looking forward to, want to hand over now to Yasha to step through some of the work he and the team did with us in terms of actually testing out this proof of concept, and look at how do we actually vet the data from our suppliers. Well, how would that look like, or how would that work? And also some of the learnings that we had for our own suppliers, because this is not just a take, or that's how I see it. Try not to have scope 3 and PCF data as just a always asking and always taking from suppliers, given that obviously they also have limited time despite wanting to meet customer needs. So how do we use this opportunity to actually help and learn alongside our suppliers and improve their own processes? Over to you, Yasha.
Thank you, Scott, for giving the background and the context of. Oh, hold on. I just have the background and the context of why we started this proof of concept, and to kind of like test the feasibility. Can we collect, at high scale? What would the process look like, right? To collect the data, but also to verify it, and yet do it actually in real world scenarios, right? Like with not only PCFs that we get maybe from public sources, but really interacting with the suppliers and understanding, okay, what's the challenges, and also what can we feedback in order to in terms of also engaging on the product level. So before also going into the proof of concept, also want to give a little bit of background where we're coming from and why are we doing this, right? So we're a software-enabled data platform, right, powering procurement and carbon accounting. So basically, we're not a carbon calculator. So just to make sure, we are actually a data source for feeding primary data into carbon accounting, for example. So we can work with any of your consultancies or also tools to feed in climate-specific data, but also into procurement and supplier management systems and processes. So we always look on how can we build on existing systems in an organization to not introduce something new, but rather utilize existing systems and processes to then integrate data collection, but also drive decarbonization incentives. And while we're doing these webinars, and now webinar 91, right? Like we really want to accelerate Scope 3 decarbonization, right? So we also don't have all the answers. I wish we did, but it's really key, right, in Scope 3 to exchange and to understand, okay, who does what can we maybe apply, what has someone else already learned, so we don't need to do the same, learnings everywhere, but rather accelerate and focus on taking action. And we're accompanying since now 5.5 years, companies really from every stage, right? In terms, if you're, starting out with Scope 3, right, and joined this webinar, for example, or other webinars that we had in the past, to bringing together the community once a year in Berlin with the Climate Transformation Summit, where around 100 procurement and climate experts gather and exchange in workshops and very practical sessions on okay, what are things that we can do together and learnings that we can apply. And we run a learning group that also takes companies, for example, from testing out initiatives to further scale initiatives in a cross-industry collaboration group, as Scott mentioned, right? There's like industry-specific initiatives, but then also on an operational level, right? Like there's often the same questions of how to set up a data and engagement program, and that's what we've done now since 2.5 years with more than 50 companies. And our main work is then really to then after setting up or really getting to a scaling strategy. So people that join the group leave with a strategic roadmap to implement further measures, and then really then in the next step actually really scaling initiatives and working together with many companies on climate intelligence around suppliers and driving decarbonization efforts. And we've done now, we started out actually with also like, we want to understand product, right? Like climate choice, we want to make climate choices. So we want to understand how can we compare products, right, in terms of in buying decisions, because Scope 3 is such a big challenge. And when we got then to first projects, we saw, okay, like product level data is not necessarily available, or maybe it's available for one product, but not 1,000 products or the product that you have bought. So what we're doing since the beginning, we're checking, like for product relevant data, but we really also like we've done it with Telefónica in 2022, we now do with a lot of companies to really assess the maturity in the supply chain, run programs to gather also also company level data, and we actually standardize the data. So we don't mind if the data is publicly available, we get it publicly without contacting suppliers, but also, of course, engaging then with the suppliers and give them feedback and then feeding it into systems. And with procurement, right, we also want to translate climate-specific information that is often very detailed, very, expert knowledge into really practical scorecards. So we provide for the suppliers always a feedback loop to understand, okay, what can they do next to improve their climate journey, and also for the procurement, really, go with the suppliers through gap analysis, understand, without being an expert, right, really understand what's missing, and really, keeping data up to date and making sure it's documented and it's high quality. So why does PCF data now matter, right? Like we've started with company-related data, but now like PCF data. We thought in the beginning, okay, like probably PCF data is available, until we made the first, requests to suppliers. So we like wanted to understand, is their data available? What's the quality of the data? And we always kind of like made the same experiences that often, either it's kind of like in process or it's available for one product. And of course, like when we started with this, calculating LCAs and EPDs and PCFs, it was very expensive. And now, it's becoming more applicable, or more usual that there's also data available, right? So, but also, like, why is it in general now still a topic, right? Because like regulation is, currently under question, and also like we always understand, okay, why do we collect that data, right? Of course, like as in an operational sense, we want to integrate it, right? We want to make decisions, but on a business level, we're also always speaking to companies, okay, what is the impact, right, on the business model? And BCG had a great study again, right, and showing that actually now it's not more, the reporting, right, that is driving necessarily or increasing the drive. It's really the client pull. So it's companies like Telefónica that ask their suppliers for information, for product or company related information, to set targets, and this is really a big impact now. And we see more and more companies integrating carbon pricing into procurement decisions. So basically, we're seeing really companies not taking action, taking a risk, right, of being delisted of suppliers, supply chains in the future, and that's where we're heading, and that's what also kind of like shows what a lot of studies say. And also what we're seeing now currently, right, that we're actually moving from a reporting, right, like everybody is working on reporting first, of course. We want to be able to understand, maybe with a spend-based analysis first and average data, where do we stand in scope 3, what product categories do we need to focus on, what suppliers do we need to focus on to engage with, and how can we make this a practical actually project, right? What we saw in the past years, right, is really that now the reporting task is actually shifting to operations. And I'm doing a scope 3 job post, so please send me yours if you have one. I'm doing this. I just prepared the new one at the moment, and there's so many companies that are now hiring in procurement scope 3 people. And this is really showing, right, we're coming really that the climate topic is being implemented all across the world. In the operations, and these are just the logos from the last, I guess, like 2 to 3 months that we saw job ads for scope 3 yet. And another initiative, right, that shows also on that we're moving towards standardization of how to actually, calculate but also exchange this data. When we started, it was that was not existent, right? So I think, like, if I remember right, it was maybe 2021, 2022, I think, Pact emerged, and now there's 2,500 companies involved, and a lot of like the biggest companies in the world are organized, right, also in the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, to align on data standards. And they're also the co-convener of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and launched a Pact, a technical standard, basically a methodology to calculate and exchange product level data, scope 3 data across value chains. And this was also a key input, of course, for our project because, you know, where do you start when you want to understand, okay, what's the quality? How do you compare PCF data or how do you compare actually the information, the standards, etc.? It's a very, complex task. And we're seeing currently the same kind of like logic emerging on product level data as we saw with company level data, right? There's a lot of different questionnaires and quality thresholds defined by companies. And the vision, of course, is that everybody uses the same standard and we can just, you know, use system and the one system speaks to the other system and we can just exchange the data. So really a structured data ecosystem. However, where we're currently often at is like actually the chaos, right? So we're getting PDFs, we're getting PowerPoint presentations, we're getting Excel files, we're getting, like product carbon footprints with different packaging, like with a lot of different, options and configurations. And it's really hard, right? Like often we see it's a very like big effort to actually check and streamline the quality and comparability and understanding, okay, what can we actually use? And this is why we also like what we kind of like took on as a challenge, right? Like how do we bring this current challenge together with where the world is hopefully heading towards, right? Of standardizing this more. And what we've done in 2024, when we actually launched the first pilot project with Telefónica, we've proven the scalability to collect the data and analyzed PCF documents from various suppliers and validating the methodology with really real world example products. And so basically kind of like understanding from moving from like who we buy from, right, to what we buy and analyzing, you know, supplier maturity, also like Telefónica presented, right, and getting also suppliers engaged on the company level towards product level engagement, product level data maturity, also creating benchmarks. And we're moving from assessing, you know, hundreds of suppliers over the years to now integrating really PCF data into libraries and digital workflows and really building the foundation for procurement decisions. And how we've done this basically is kind of like, okay, can we take kind of like the input that is currently coming in, no matter the channel, right? If it's coming per email, if it's coming into your supplier management system, can we take this and kind of like analyze it and then turn it into a packed kind of like aligned product data set and quality assessment? And that's basically what we've done first in this project, right? To kind of like really started, okay, what do we get when we request a product carbon footprint from companies? And can we actually do a structured analysis on it in order to kind of like automate quality assessments and maybe do more with it? And we've derived a kind of like a data set structure from the PACT methodology first, right before we researched kind of like in general, right? Okay, what standards are out there in the world, what is emerging, etc. PACT was really the one that is kind of like cross, right, industry applicable, right? Also covers all PCF methodologies. And basically this data set that includes, so take a document, right, and then kind of like get a data set. Of course, there's much more data points behind this, but get really the product inventory data, details out of it, get the PCF methodology out of it, get data integrity and quality information out of it, assurance and verification. So is there third-party assurance on the PCF calculation, but then also the actual data emission set, right? So like in understanding, is it a cradle to gate? Is it a cradle to grave factor? Is it an LCA? Is it an EPD? And so on. And then actually have also the information that we want then in the end, right, to use for our calculation. So actually the emissions, and can we use it kind of like, you know, understanding the quality of the PCFs. Yes, Josepha, you have a question?
Yeah, Yasha, there's actually a question that goes beyond a little bit the scope of what we are discussing here. But there's a question from Zenram asking if beyond PCS, right, there's also the inclusion of product environmental footprints, looked at, so to say, through what we do.
And that's important detail. So yes, so PCF methodology here refers to, is it a PCF? Is it an EPD? Is it a product environmental declaration? Is it a is it a life cycle assessment document? So this would be an output, right, that you would get from this analysis to understand what standard was used, like what cross-industry standard was used in terms of calculating the emissions? And also, is there any industry-specific standard, right? Like, for example, Together for Sustainability has a PCF standard published. So it's really built to really understand, okay, what is this, what we're looking at, right? But just like you get typically, right, documents, 100 pages, and then put it in and right away understand, okay, what is this document about? And this is also kind of like the thought behind it, right? Like, how can we empower someone that doesn't understand, right, all the details right away? And how can we turn this into more practical and actionable information for everyone?
And there's one more question. I mean, you somehow already answered it, but from Ines, looking again into this piece, right, of like different inputs, outputs, and how do you ensure to make comparability between different PCFs? So I guess then also for people to really work with it. What's your key advice here?
So I think like also looking at the question, right, like does it need to be third-party verified? So that could be something, right, like that you could build on top of this, right? Like if your company says we only accept third-party verified product carbon footprint data, which is actually very relevant, right, in terms of auditing the information and integrating it. Like, so if an auditor looks then on the information, right, like the third-party verification would be very valuable to not understand then the PCF methodology instead, but really have this transparent. That could be one definition or threshold, but like a practical use case, right? Often when you ask for a PCF, the third-party verification might be there, but it might not have been shared with you. So getting indication of, like, aha, it refers to a third-party verification, but we don't understand who was the auditor, when was the audit, etc. This is one of the use cases that is actually very real world experience. Scott, do you want to add on that?
I think this is where we need to go. Otherwise, you have some that have gone to the effort of getting it audited and verified, and others that perhaps don't. And therefore, are you really comparing two completely comparable PCFs? So I think that's where things are needing to head. At the moment, our process isn't utilizing PCFs as a core section. That's where we're trying to move to. So that would be where we're heading.
And yes, then moving actually to the real world example, what we've did first, right? Like it's an Excel file, so it wasn't like magic in the first place, right? Like, but we looked at, okay, what are we actually getting? And what we derived then from this, set of information, we basically derived the scoring. So kind of like just weighing the information, is it complete, right? What is available, and then scoring the information. And here you can see, right? Like we looked at 4 different companies and 5 different products first, and then you can see, okay, the scores actually differed, right, quite a lot. So that is kind of like the first exercise that we did, and that was already really interesting because we interacted with all suppliers and also understood, okay, what questions come up, is there like further information that we can gather, etc. And Scott, if you want to add anything, please just feel free to unmute. Yep.
I think the key learning here was sort of what we were able to feed back to those suppliers. So for context, these were some network equipment suppliers for microwave equipment, I believe, telecommunication microwaves as opposed to those that cook your dinner. And yeah, it was effectively looking at, well, how good is the data that they have at the moment, given that we're not the only ones asking them for this data. So really helping them fine tune the data that they have for future sharing as well. So trying to treat this as a learning experience for our suppliers as well as ourselves.
And I think also with that data, right, like first we also looked at like, okay, just like small, also kind of like just PCF data that was there, right, also in the beginning. So there was also a lot of other information and also a lot of other companies and products that we looked at, right? And this is only like just a small kind of like overview that you can see here. And what we've done now, right, like we wanted to understand, okay, how can we use this actually? So first idea actually also from the interaction was, okay, can we run this gap analysis and then feed it back to companies and engage on a product level? How can we make sure we get better PCF data year by year and over time and communicate our expectations? in line, right, like with emerging standards and or with specifically PACT. And how this then kind of like we took it to the next level, right, and said, okay, now we're ready. We have enough information to actually turn this into a product, right? So now what we've done kind of like in a subsequent or what we're doing in a subsequent kind of like project is that really we implemented it fully in our platform. So now companies can actually manage product directories of suppliers in our platform. We've done here used some public available PCF data, but basically you can see you can actually share now PCF data and get directly the data, but also the assessment out of the system, right? And this can be then integrated into any workflow or into any system on your end. So as mentioned in the beginning, we're very focused on data exchange and ensuring security and support of suppliers, and also helping kind of like with how does data collection, how is it incentivized, how can we keep data up to date. So this is our background, right? Like we're coming from financial data background and from managing of data. So that is really our focus here, to then like your company, for example, then could build on top of that like different use cases. And I'm seeing the time is running, so we have 5 minutes left, but Scott, we're also almost done. So Scott, handing over to you for the Telefónica based use cases that we identified.
And yeah, I guess to preface any potential questions, this is where we're heading. This is not where we are. So I wish I could put my feet up and say this is all implemented and running and it's all good to go. But this is, I guess, where we're trying to, or what we see as being able to use in the future from the outputs of this initial pilot project. What we're hoping to scale it up into is, I guess, getting better data from our suppliers and effectively a constant back to and fro in terms of the maturity of what they're able to supply, developing those the database that Yasha just touched upon in terms of actually helping our own in-house design teams and engineers in terms of how do we actually bring down the carbon footprint of those designs based on the information we have access to through PCFs, and then how do we actually embed it into the typical total cost of carbon process. And Yasha?
And then actually Scott and I, we also ran actually now 2 workshops on this topic, right, with a lot of other companies. And maybe what we can also share, what we heard, like, for example, from companies joining the Climate Summit last year. We also ran a workshop, okay, what is kind of like potential use cases of data and how can we utilize it, is specifically, right, we're seeing data quality requests, right, from a lot of companies on product related information, but you could really, like, with with this approach, you can really automate really the quality threshold check right away, right? And you can build like empower procurement teams. So procurement teams could say basically, okay, do we have all information that is required for our own definition of PCF data quality that we can use, or is it not? And also, automate feedback around it. But also cut manual work, feed emission data into carbon pricing and decision making, and integrating it, of course, with carbon accounting that we're actually already doing with other tools, and also consultants on other projects that we're working on. And with that, I think we came to an end. So if you have questions, of course, like happy to answer them in the next minutes. But like, if in case not, please do get in touch. We would love to have you join, right, and discuss your use cases, and also work together on practical next steps in order to drive decarbonization in scope 3 together. So we're always also looking for new use cases. And thanks a lot for listening, and handing over to Josepha again.
Yeah, thank you. And as I was saying, so we will copy out all the questions from the chat and then also share it with you afterwards. So I will get the answers in, and then you get it. But maybe just to close this round, I would love to, ask one finalizing question to the 2 of you. And Yasha, maybe let's start with you, because you always say that carbon can only count if you really integrate it then also in existing systems and processes. So I mean, you've now been testing this approach with multiple companies, industries, etc. But what is the most transferable lesson from the Telefónica pilot that others could also apply
I
tomorrow?
think I always say the same, and no matter the context, just start. Like start to understand, what are you like, getting when you ask for the information, what's needed, right? Like internally, what stakeholders are involved, and what's the kind of like, state on the supplier side. I think like starting is the most important part in any kind of like innovation or pilot project, and I think, yeah, my takeaway. But Scott, handing over.
Yeah. And Scott, for you, what is the most important value add and biggest learning from this collaboration with us?
I think well, apart from needing to just get started because discussions just take forever. I guess everyone has their own priorities, be it suppliers or even internally. And on top of that, I think that not all product carbon footprints are created equally, and so the difficulty of setting just a specific sustainability requirement, given the inability to compare different analyses. So really needing to, I guess, push in everyone's respective industries to try and actually improve the quality, because otherwise, you are really comparing apples with oranges.
Yeah, and there were a lot of questions on it, and Yasha's already typing in answers to it, but also in the follow-up mail you will get it. And I really want to say thank you to the two of you. I think you gave a very holistic picture, and particularly on this like path of really moving toward what's product carbon footprint collection. And actually, for everybody who has now been wondering, okay, so then how does the next step look like? How do you really integrate it into procurement? Well, this is what we will be looking at in our upcoming webinar on the 4th of December. So you will also get more information on it. So there we will be looking at the use case of Zeiss and how they integrate carbon into their existing systems and processes to really steer their existing supplier base for Scope 3 emission reduction. And with that, I hope that all of you learned as much as I did. And thank you so much. Enjoy the sun in Berlin. And Scott, I hope, it looks like you get some sun through your window so that you're also having a sunny afternoon. And we keep in touch.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great afternoon.